So thank you, Dakshina, for the introduction, the welcome, and it's always a pleasure and a special blessing to be here with people in this atmosphere. And I've come here a number of times on different occasions, and so it's a very nice opportunity to talk about Sri Aurobindo's Savitri over here. Savitri is a very major work. Some people consider it, the mother has also spoken about it, as Sri Aurobindo's preeminent work, the fruit of his entire life, you may say, in writing, in text form. There are other reasons to consider it that, because it is poetry and it is mantric poetry. And there's a way in which one can consider that the mantra is the sound body of the consciousness that we are talking about. So this is, in a way, the sound body of Sri Aurobindo. And so to introduce Savitri is not an easy undertaking. It's something that introduces itself. So this is an opportunity to open the pages so that you can make it yours and it can make you its. So a little bit about the background of Savitri. Savitri, in the common understanding, is a little story that is told in the Mahabharata. And that's the first time we have it in existing texts that exist. And in that story, it's actually a passage in which a sage is talking to one of the brothers, the eldest brother of the 5 brothers, Pandavas, and he's asking about who could be more exemplary than Draupadi. And the sage tells the story of Savitri there. And this story is, as the sage tells it, the story is about a king, Ashwapati, who is looking for an heir. So the story is a little more ordinary than what Sri Aurobindo makes of it, which we'll come to in a moment. But he doesn't have a child, he's looking for an heir, and he undergoes tapasya to the sun god, Savitra, the Vedic sun god, asking for the boon of a child. So the first unexpected thing that happens is that the sun god does appear to him, but he gives him the blessing of a daughter. So he's happy with the blessing of a daughter. This is Savitri. But what will come of it, he doesn't really know. Savitri grows up and she's a very powerful person. And in these early times in India, when a young woman came to age, she either found somebody because suitors came and actually sought her hand, came to the parent and sought her hand, or if that didn't happen, there was a little ceremony called the Swayamvara. So the Swayamvara is a ceremony in which the suitors came and they were challenged to a task, like a competition. And that's how Draupadi was won in the Swayamvara by the 5 brothers, by Arjuna actually. But there's a whole story about how the 5 brothers became her husbands. And even if that doesn't happen, then the girl is set free to find her own husband. So in Savitri's case, she was so powerful that nobody sought her hand. And even the Swayamvara was dispensed with. And so the father said, go find your husband. And she sets out and finds her husband in the woods. And he's the son of an exiled king. So this is also what is part of the story in the Mahabharata. They marry, and when they are coming back from the forest to the kingdom, they find the presence of a rather controversial celestial figure, Narada, who is the devotee of Vishnu, like an archangel, an archetypal devotee of Vishnu, who often says very controversial things. He's a messenger who brings messages that are not always very palatable. So he is there in the court. They find him in the court. He's waiting for them. And he says that, I see that the two of you are together. It's not such a good thing because in a year's time, Satyavan will die. Of course, Satyavan doesn't hear this. Savitri hears this. And the father in the actual story tries to circumvent the marriage. It says, is it not possible to prevent this unfortunate possibility? And Savitri says, no, my word once given, I can't take it back. So they do live together for a year, and at the end of the year, on the appointed day, Savitri asks, they go back to the woods, and they live in the house of Satyavan, the husband. And Savitri asks the father-in-law if she can go with him. He's a woodcutter in the forest. And the father-in-law says yes. So she goes with him, and as expected, he's smitten from within by death, and he dies. In the presence of death, Yama appears, and then there is a dialogue between Savitri and death, in which death does not want to, of course, give back life to Satyavan, but Savitri asks questions in a kind of a tricky way and pleases death till the point that she gets the boon of her husband back. Now, this is a short story, and it has entered into the Indian cultural imaginary as a kind of exemplary wife. You see, wives should always think about bringing their husbands back from death, or something like that. You know, as they say, aim for the stars, maybe you'll get the trees. So Sri Aurobindo turned his attention to this story quite early. And there is a prelude to this story in his work, which is a long poem called Love and Death, which is again based on an old Sanskrit theme. And essentially, it's about the power of love to challenge death and bring back a dead person. Now, this is a very, very esoteric theme that occurs in world literature in several ways. So you have, for example, Orpheus and Eurydice, that is a case of going into Hades and bringing back the dead, and in this case, the wife, right? Orpheus brings back Eurydice, but cannot bring her back because he turns to see her when he's asked not to turn when they're returning. Then you have the story of, in Egyptian lore, you have Isis and Osiris. You have Dionysius in the early mythological descriptions of Dionysius. And one may say that though you don't have the notion of somebody following after and bringing back someone from death, where there is a couple involved, you may say the return from death is also central to Jesus Christ himself, who dies and returns, is born out of death. So this idea evidently was very central to Sri Aurobindo's own imagination and his aspiration, one may say. And it becomes a central esoteric aspiration which enters into his own life, yoga, and teaching. Ultimately, the notion of the conquest of death. So if one is familiar with Sri Aurobindo's corpus of writings, one sees that the idea of conquering death is a aspect, one may say a fringe aspect of the transformation of the human being by the supramental consciousness. But if we were to look at it in its central metaphysical premise, we see how it conflicts with another major spiritual tenet which we find in all world philosophies and spiritualities, which is that the body is meant to die. The body is made of dust and returns to dust. In fact, we find this statement even in the Isha Upanishad. Of ashes are the body made, and to ashes it returns. And entire streams of world spirituality have followed in the direction of coming to terms with this. We have to come to terms with the fact that we are born and we die. And can we find something beyond death? And can we forget about the fact that we have a body and find something purely spiritual which outlasts the passing of the body? But as against this, we also have world teachings, world spiritualities that move in the other direction, that speak about the fact that there is an aspiration for the immortality of the body. So this is the notion of even mummification in Egypt, in a way, is a kind of replication of the idea of Osiris, who goes into the underworld and will come back reborn. So the body itself, it is thought, would be revived at a certain point. This is also the idea behind Chinese mummification. See? The idea that the body could be taken back by the soul when it is powerful enough to re-enter the body. You see? So ideas of this kind have existed. And I'd say a recurrence of that idea is what we find in the myth of the Christ. The entire legend of Christ's life is an esoteric recurrence of this theme. People don't look at it like that, but this is really what the esoteric yogic understanding of Christ's life is all about. That is it possible for a consciousness to be powerful enough to persist in a body beyond death? So we find that Sri Aurobindo is concerned about this possibility. in a philosophical way or metaphysical way, in a simplified form, he expresses it thus, that if the eternal dwells in us, the translation of eternity into physical terms is immortality. If we are to be the eternal in an integral way, we must also be immortal. This is part of the integrality of eternity. And he points out how the entire journey of the human soul as something which enters into its opposite to explore its own powers and its own knowledge, undergoes this challenge life after life. Every life is seized or ended with a question mark, the question mark of death, which is, how is it that that which experiences itself as eternal disappears from the manifestation at a certain level? And so at a certain depth of our own existence, the soul is grappling with this question. It comes back again and again and experiences this again and again, and each time seeks for greater power to arrive at the point where it can actually find the consciousness with which it can become immortal in the body. This is one aspect of the soul's journey. There are many stages to the achievement of this aspect, but certainly this is part of the mystery of the return of the soul, whether we look at it mythologically or through legends or through the human life itself, as a life that reincarnates, that comes back. So Sri Aurobindo is taking this particular theme and he's looking at it, he's dramatizing it through these two major characters, the two primary characters of this epic Savitri, who in this case are the father Ashwapati and the daughter Savitri. Satyavan is around, but he's more like a cipher in the story as Sri Aurobindo tells it. He is the prize of the battle, so to say, with death. We find that in Sri Aurobindo's case, he tells the story in terms of the two major powers or forces that he sees as central to the yoga of, integral yoga, of integral development. And these two central powers are aspiration and grace. So he comes down, this is the way in which he boils his entire yoga down to what he tells us in the beginning lines of the book, The Mother. See. There are two powers that alone can effect in their conjunction the great and difficult thing which is the aim of our endeavor, a fixed and unfailing aspiration from below that calls from below, and a supreme grace from above that answers. So one may say that there is a messianism involved in Sri Aurobindo's teaching. There is the idea of an intervention involved in Sri Aurobindo's teaching. Sri Aurobindo's teaching proceeds on the idea that there are certain kinds of lines drawn to the creation that it is not possible for the power that is constrained by that creation to break. That which is within the creation has accepted the bounds of that creation. But there is the power to call for the unexpected and the impossible. And calling for the unexpected and the impossible brings an intervention. Brings an intervention from outside that system. The system is porous to something outside it, which breaks through as an intervention. And that intervention causes a new kind of manifestation to occur. So we find that these two powers, the power of aspiration and the power of grace, ultimately are beyond our capacity. We have the capacity of aspiring, but even the aspiration is not entirely in our hands at present. We can aspire with a little bit of what we have. To grow the aspiration, we need the grace. And with the grace, there comes a greater aspiration. The idea of the intervention is central to the theological notion of the avatar, the incarnation, the being who is not constrained by the ignorance, by the avidya, who retains his entire self-knowledge when he enters the avidya, and brings the powers that are closed to the creation, to the manifestation as we know it. Okay. So, Sri Aurobindo begins this entire epic by fielding a symbol. The epic itself is a symbol. He calls it a legend and a symbol. But it begins with a symbol, the symbol dawn. And it projects two avataric figures. Both these two forces that I talked about. There is the avatar of aspiration and the avatar of grace. And they are gendered in his telling. So, aspiration is gendered male. It is Ashwapati, the father, and grace is gendered female. It is the Divine Mother entering the creation as the daughter. The daughter who will accept the conditions of the creation and break the bounds of the limitations. So, to feel this dramatic episode, Sri Aurobindo begins with the symbol dawn. Now, the idea of the symbol dawn is a Vedic idea. So, he is going back in a sense to the Veda. And in the Veda, we can talk about three ways of looking at reality. One way may be called a heliocentric way, the way of the sun. In the heliocentric way, there is no duality. There is only light. There is only the one and its self-revelation at all times, eternally. That is one way of looking at the reality. There is no darkness there, no night there. Another is our way, which we may call the geocentric way. The geocentric way is the way in which we see dualities of day and night. Everything proceeds through revelation and a withdrawal. And that withdrawal is painful because we are in the ignorance. So this duality is itself the sign of the ignorance. a sun that cannot last, a sun that is swallowed up, just like we were talking about death swallowing up the soul. See, the soul that cannot persist beyond the compulsion of the night. See, the sun cannot outlast the compulsion of the darkness. So in the geocentric way, as the Veda puts it, the sun enters into the darkness. And entering into the darkness, it is stolen by the thieves, the robbers, the punnies, and hidden in the cave of darkness. And when that happens, then the dark is all we experience. It's a painful night. And then the agents of the sun in the darkness start acting. The Rig Veda, the largest number of hymns in the Rig Veda are to Indra. Not because Indra is the preeminent god of the Rig Veda, but he is the one that we need most. He is the deity in the darkness, who with his lightnings shows up tracts of land and helps in the opening up of the cave of darkness. He has agents and helpers, and he fights for the release of the hidden sun. And the sun returns. Out of the cave of darkness is released. It comes back. So this is the recurring cycle of the geocentric view of things. And there's a third view of things. That is the view of the sun, the solar view looking at the geocentric. That has not lost itself in the darkness, but sees the darkness as an agent towards the evolutionary journey of consciousness. Another kind of manifestation. In this way, in this third way, day and night are two sisters, two mothers that give birth to the divine child. So we have these three ways of looking at reality in the Veda. Sri Aurobindo starts with the symbol dawn to show us this symbol of recurrence at the point, in the geocentric view, at the point where it has lost itself and is about to be reborn. The consciousness that has been obliterated by the night, but retains a little dim memory of its past and is about to awake and is thinking to itself, should I awake? The first thing it experiences is the pain of repeated failure. It is the many deaths that we have undergone, speaking to us at the moment of our coming into life again. Is this going to be another one of the same? But every birth is an opportunity. Every birth is the possibility of the breaking of the bounds of repeated journeys. Every birth brings something new. And the symbol dawn is telling us that. The symbol dawn is at once three kinds of dawns. It is the dawn of the day that Satyavan will die. It is the dawn of Savitri's messianism, a messianic power, the dawn of the breaking of her limitations. And it is the dawn of a new cosmic cycle. So we have these three conflated in this symbol dawn, which is what makes it so, there is so much uh, power in it, and there's so much, so many layers to it. It's so layered, multi-layered, because he's speaking at once of all these different kinds of dawns, of births. See? So, Savitri as an epic begins in the middle. See, and that's the whole thing about the symbol dawn. The symbol dawn itself, every dawn is a middle and a beginning. It's a beginning and a middle. Savitri itself is a beginning and a middle. See, it is a new birth, and at the same time, it is a repetition of many births that have gone before. So too in Savitri, we find that it is the middle or towards the end of the story that we begin. And this is an epic convention. And so Sri Aurobindo, who was a scholar of the classics, is following epic convention. You find the Iliad begins like that, the Odyssey begins like that, the Mahabharata itself to some extent begins like that. Mahabharata is much more complex. It's got stories within stories within stories to complicate the idea of what is the beginning. You see, where is the beginning of this beginningless journey? You see, every beginning points to another beginning. And the paradox of that is what he's fielding over there. It is the paradox of looking at eternity and time at the same gaze, with the same gaze. Sri Aurobindo, we just talked about the immortality of the body as being the translation of eternity in physical terms. In the very first chapter of the Synthesis of Yoga, Sri Aurobindo has a sentence. It says, "The condition of a material immortality is to be reborn perpetually in time." Is to be reborn perpetually in time. He's not saying that the immortality is a entry into continuity, into the realm of continuity without any breaks. He's talking about the entry into the world of beginnings and ends. Because the quantization of time, entry into little quanta of life, being born, living and dying, is the condition of this kind of creation in which we live. Therefore, the physical immortality that he is talking about is a conscious rebirth. The conscious rebirth is not the compulsion of death, but the conscious movement from life to life. And that is what the symbol dawn is about. And that to some extent is what Savitri is about. We have to understand Savitri in those terms. So the story, as Sri Aurobindo tells it, is similar to the story of the Mahabharata, with the big difference that Ashwapati is the avatar of aspiration. And he's not looking for an heir to sit on his throne. He finds himself entering into other states of consciousness. And a yoga opens up in him. And through this, using his own inner guidance, he tracks the inner realms and figures out the fact that whatever we experience of suffering, death, pain, etc., need not be. That there is what we talked about, that there is a geocentric zone in which we live, of night and day, of life and death, of dualities, of joy and suffering, happiness and pain. But there is a realm beyond that where everything is forever in unshadowed bliss eternally. And that there is a link between the two. This is the key teaching of Sri Aurobindo, that there is a third zone, a zone that connects the heliocentric and the geocentric. This is what he calls supermind. So, Ashwapati discovers that. He discovers that in his own life, in his own yoga. And after discovering that, he asks the question, how can this be made the world condition? How can everybody have it? And for that, he starts exploring the various realms to see what stands in the way and what can be done to erase that condition. So this is the journey that he undertakes. So we can see roughly the way in which Sri Aurobindo tells this story in the cantos that he, or books and cantos that he draws up. So there are 3 parts. The first part has the Book of Beginnings with what I talked about, the symbol dawn, which is really the day that Satyavan will die. Savitri wakes up and she recollects the prelude to the action of the day. See what has happened, all lives back in her, comes back to her, and this is the issue. What is it that she has to do? What is she confronted with? And then we have a flashback to her father Ashwapati. And this is the yoga of the king, the yoga of the soul's release. And we see Ashwapati growing up and acquiring the consciousness with which he is going to actually bring about the intervention that is Savitri's life. See, so Ashwapati goes through this chapter called then we have the secret knowledge. The secret knowledge is an intervening chapter between the yoga of the king part 1 called yoga of the soul's release, and the yoga of the king part 2, the yoga of the spirit's freedom and greatness. So in this second part, we find him actually exploring this middle layer between the geocentric and the heliocentric, you may say. But the intervening canto called the secret knowledge is where Sri Aurobindo tells us about what this connection is all about. And he tells it in terms of the 2 in 1. This is, as I said, there is a idea of 2 polarities. We call it heliocentric and geocentric. We call it aspiration and grace. So this polarity is sundered in our world of dualities. In our world, we see them as 2. They are separate. But we can also see that they were 1, or they are 1 in another zone, and that they hide their oneness for a play, for the play of difference. And the play of difference evolves to a point where it doesn't cease to be different, but knows itself to be the one playing at difference. This is the middle ground. This is the third realm, you may say. That is the secret knowledge. Okay, that's the secret knowledge. And Sri Aurobindo tells it in that canto in terms of Purusha and Prakriti, the two, in this case, gendered beings that are at play in the cosmos. Out of this knowledge and out of this experience that Ashwapati has, he moves to a kind of cosmic desire, you may say, that why can't this be everybody's experience? And for that, he starts exploring the various realms in a very systematic fashion. And that gives us book 2, the book of the Traveler of the Worlds, which you may say is Sri Aurobindo's cosmology. Great epics like Dante's Divine Comedy gives us a cosmology. So Sri Aurobindo gives us an entire cosmology through this book of the Traveler of the Worlds. And we'll talk about the cosmology that Sri Aurobindo has spoken about in many ways, in many places. In a nutshell, these are the 7 realms that the Veda talks about. And he is going to focus on the lower 3 realms and the 4th, which is really the mediator. So if we again go back to the metaphor of the heliocentric and the geocentric realms, the heliocentric realms are the realms of the upper 3 worlds that in later literature will be called Sat, Chit and Ananda. See? And that is the realm of eternity, the realm of the One, the realm of unitive consciousness. And below you have 3, which are in the Upanishads called Annam, Prana and Mana. And these are Sri Aurobindo's translations will tell us these are matter, life and mind. So these 3 principles, we think of them as principles, and they are emergent principles in our own evolution and the evolution of the earth. We find that there is matter, a material creation, and at a certain point, the properties of life emerge in matter. So we have life as a new layer that appears on matter. And then you find that the properties of mind appear in living matter. See? So these are emergent properties. They did not exist, and once they came to exist, they seemed totally new to what existed. See? So these 3 are, in Sri Aurobindo's terms, actually manifestations in a material world of independent worlds. Independent worlds of consciousness. So the world of life, the world of mind, you see. And in Sri Aurobindo's cosmology, which is also a psychology, there is an interesting fact that each one of these is really everything. The whole exists in each, in every each. So the whole exists in matter, the whole exists in life, the whole exists in mind. What we are seeing is really the one being that is presenting itself through a certain configuration in which that kind of consciousness is fronted and the rest goes behind. See? But also behind, first what goes behind are the other properties of that zone. So if you're talking about the geocentric zone, behind matter will be a material matter, a life matter, and a material mind. See, then we'll have the world of life with a material life which is materialized. You have life which is pure life, and life which is a mental life. Sri Aurobindo will use the term the vital mind or vital mental. Then you have the mind consciousness, which again will have three layers to it: a material mind or physical mind, a vital mind, and a pure mind, a mental mind. So these allow for cross linkages to take place, because the question can arise, if there is going to be a stratification of consciousness into new properties, how can one of these even talk to another? To some extent they can, and to some extent they can't. It is the reason that they can't, which is why life is always a guest in matter. It is not intimate to matter. It is going to be rejected at a certain point. And that's why death takes place. It's the same for mind. Mind and life are guests in matter. Matter is its own principle. But this is only a manner of speaking. Behind it, they can be linked one to another, because there are these properties of the others within each layer of consciousness. And even beyond it is the one. So that if one has the power, one can evoke the one in any layer of consciousness. Anything can become anything else. That's why at a certain point the mother is saying, everything is really a matter of power. Everything is a matter of power. Do you have the power to do it? See? It's not so easy to arrive at that power. To arrive at that power, you have to go through what Sri Aurobindo is talking about. Realize the tapas through which the division is maintained. What is that force by which the division is maintained? And develop enough power to erase that division. The way to do it, as he's pointing out, is that you cannot develop that power so long as you are under the bondage to that power. But you can call on what has created that to erase the bondage. This is really the message of Savitri. So, calling on that, that's the reason why that tapas, the tapas of the Lord is the mother. That's why the call to the Shakti of that consciousness of the being, the Shakti of the being, is that which makes it active for the power to be transformed. See, this is in a way, what I'm telling you right now is the entire philosophy of Tantra. This is the whole meaning of Tantra, which is the invoking of the intervention of Shakti to develop the Shakti or mobilize the Shakti that can break the limitations that exist in any particular consciousness. So this is the way in which Sri Aurobindo proceeds. Ashwapati travels these worlds, and as we'll see, the higher he goes, the more difficult it becomes. And he starts entering into these periods of nights within the consciousness itself. He repeatedly hits these trances of non-existence. He cannot retain his consciousness. And each time that happens, he faints, as it were. Something is prepared that allows him, an intervention takes place that allows him to go a little further. You see? And finally, he comes right up to a place where he's at the borders between knowledge and ignorance. So we find that in the cantos, you get first the world stare, idea of the world stare, which is the cosmic, series of planes, is again something that is repeated in many kinds of literatures. You have the notion of Jacob's ladder, right? You have the notion, which repeats again in the idea of Muhammad's night journey. Muhammad, when he undertakes his night journey, climbs this ladder. And you have that notion repeating in a number of Indian texts. And finally, interestingly, you have this notion covered by Sri Ramakrishna, who says that there are two kinds of beings. He uses the term Jiva Koti and Ishvara Koti. He says the Jiva Koti, that is the being who belongs to the world of jivas, creatures, can climb the ladder but cannot climb back. While the Ishvara Koti, who belongs to the zone of the Ishvara, freely climbs up and down the ladder. See? We are going back to this heliocentric and geocentric idea. The Jiva Koti is the one who is constrained by the dualities. Our rebirths are rebirths within the duality. This is what Krishna is saying to Arjuna in the Gita. The difference between you and me is that I remember all my births while you have forgotten. The reason why you have forgotten is because you are constrained by the dualities to forget what you are beyond the dualities. See? While the avatar retains the entire track of consciousness because he has not accepted the forgetting, the amnesia of Maya in entering into the avidya. See? So the Ishvara Koti, that term is a very interesting term, because avatar, we sometimes think, is a specific term for certain kinds of beings talked about in the Vaishnava Puranas that Vishnu undertakes as births. But these are not the only avatars. We may expand that idea and say Christ was an avatar. But these are not the only avatars. There are many kinds of avatars. Any being that belongs to the Ishvar Koti, that comes into the Jiva Koti, is an avatar. The rishis of the Veda are Ishvara Kotis in that sense. The Angirasa rishis, the ones who are known as the ancestors. See? And this entire pantheon that we are talking about seems to be a male-dominated pantheon, because where are the Shakti avatars? And that's what Sri Aurobindo is speaking about here. There are Shakti avatars. And the Shakti avatar, without the Shakti avatar, transformation, the intervention of the Shakti avatar is necessary for cosmic transformation. This is how he's putting it over here. So, Ashwapati is an Ishvara Koti. This is why he can experience this. He travels up and down. And then he explores the world stair. And after exploring the world stair, he rises to the summit of that division between Vidya and Avidya, of the heliocentric and geocentric realms. He does that. So you see the kingdom of subtle matter, the glory and the fall of life, which is really about the vital. And here this canto is very beautiful, where he's actually going to talk about how life principle itself was an intervention. It came down, and it came down thinking that it will save matter. But it's, as I said, these are two different principles. In coming into matter, it encounters an alien principle, and becomes subject to its forces of suppression and oppression. See, it becomes troubled. See, it loses its native freedom. See, so that's the glory and fall of life. And then out of that arises life in matter. And I think he's fielding with that this idea that every descent of a higher consciousness into a lower consciousness is going to create new conditions that are not the freedom of that older consciousness, but are conditions in which it has to really struggle to find a place, a foothold in this new consciousness. It's something alien. It's like an alien that really has to learn the language of where it was and become one with what doesn't want to give it a place. And becoming one, it marries that, and something new arises. Something completely new arises. So these are the emergent properties of life in matter. So we have the kingdoms of little life, which is, again, we see these triads, and even within them Sri Aurobindo will talk about a triple world of such and such. These are the triads because they are linkages with the other forms of consciousness. Kingdom of little life and the godheads of little life, which is the first level of the vital. The kingdoms and godheads of the greater life, which is, he calls it the higher vital. This is the realm of the higher vital. And then he finds in that zone the obstruction of the way in which life in its dealings with matter gets turned into its opposite. See, this is what allows him to begin talking about the descent into night, the world of falsehood, the mother of evil, and the sons of darkness. So this canto, we'll talk about it more when we talk about Ashwapathi's journey, but again, metaphysically, it's a really important factor in Sri Aurobindo's cosmology, because it is that which accounts for what we may call ontological evil. That you see, there are different philosophical teachings, some to which there is no evil, there is only ignorance, see, and some to which, including Christianity, there is ontological evil. So Sri Aurobindo is developing a cosmology in which there is a place for ontological evil, and we'll see that how that happens. In a nutshell, metaphysically, Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics proceeds from the idea of the sacrifice of Purusha, which means that there is a supreme consciousness that enters into its opposite or becomes its opposite. The one, or light, which is again the heliocentric notion of the one self-conscious reality, loses its self-consciousness, becomes inconscient, hides its self-consciousness. And this big amnesia with a capital A, this self-forgetting, self-oblivion, is something that is also a painful experience. It is the divine's own experience of the loss of its own consciousness. See? And within it, there is a second loss, the loss of unity. The one becomes fragmented into its infinite particles without having any connection with its oneness. See? It's the darkness and the infinite dispersion of the one. That is the fall. See, this is the fall. And in this fall, what occurs is the hidden aspiration to rise again. You see? And so what we'll find is that this fall takes place, And into this, the entirety of the integral divine plunges, so that in every individual dispersed particle there is the whole. And in the entire darkness there is the whole, but hidden deep inside. See? Now, if this condition is to be given its independence, is to be called a world, then it has to have the choice to remain what it is. That choice has to be real to it. The choice to refuse light, the choice to refuse unity, is also an integral part of the independence of this ontological condition. And that is the basis of ontological evil. If it was only a forgetting that inevitably returns to a remembering, there would be no evil. It would be only ignorance. But if there is a will in it to remain what it is, then it is evil, because that is counter to a return to its own condition. And the action of that will allows the independence of that condition to remain what it is. It also puts the pressure of resistance to the aspiration to rise, the pressure of resistance. And we'll find this throughout Savitri. The human condition is racked with pain, you see, and with this kind of resistance and with the power of evil. That's the reason why, to overcome this power, we need the intervention of that which is beyond it. You see, that's part of the theology of this work. So from this he moves back to the higher vital, the heaven worlds of the vital, the paradise of the life gods. And then he enters the worlds of mind, the kingdoms of godheads of the little mind. The little mind is what we experience. He calls it the mortal mind. You see, the mortal mind, the levels that we already experience, which is already a triple realm. A realm of the physical mind, the vital mind, and the intelligent mind. See? And then he moves beyond the realm of the human mind to what he calls the heavens of the ideal. The heavens of the ideal begin to open up the cosmic ranges of mind, leading to overmind. Yeah. 1 second. I'll finish quickly, then we'll take up. And then this heavens of the ideal is it's a beautiful canto, short but beautiful canto, in which there are two ideals that are drawing our aspiration upwards. They are symbolized by the fire and the rose. See, the fire, which is the power of will, of power itself, and the rose, which is beauty and harmony. These are two directions of our aspiration. And from here he comes to the self of mind. And this is the self of mind, you may say, is the being of mind. It's the Purusha of mind. And the self of mind is really a zone of what he calls the overmind. There are many zones to the overmind. But the self of mind is the zone where a lid is put between the truth consciousness and this world, which can remain, the independence to remain what it is. This independence to remain what it is maintained at the peaks of mind by a cosmic skepticism. A cosmic skepticism, a kind of cosmic force of doubt, that everything that we may catch a glimpse of may not be what it seems. So this is a kind of a cosmic power of the mind that, you know, can act at all the levels up to the overmind. And then from there, all meaning is lost there. There is no meaning. The quest for meaning ceases there. And that's where he actually finds an opening to something else. The tunnel to another dimension that he calls the world soul. This is the psychic zone of the cosmos, the world soul, to which our psychic beings are connected, to which we go after we die and have a psychic sleep, as it were, which gives meaning to the cosmos. And he regains meaning from this world soul. And from there he rises out, because the world soul, the psychic, is even each of us as a psychic being that is superior to the cosmos, that is really coming from the Satchidananda. And so he jumps out of the realm of mind into these realms of the border beyond the overmind, towards the supermind. And those zones are the kingdoms of greater knowledge that lead him out, entirely out. And once he enters into this pursuit of the unknowable, the book of the Divine Mother, he's at such a point that his consciousness is getting erased. He has forgotten why he has come there. He can't retain his knowledge or even his memory. And just when he's about to disappear in this consciousness, in this great moksha, of the supreme Satchidananda, you may say, the Divine Mother turns to him. She is the embodiment of the supramental Shakti. She turns to him and speaks to him. And then that entire book, which is book 3, is about his relations with that power that ultimately allow him to experience the supramental consciousness and to invoke the intervention of the Shakti, who resists at first, but then she accepts and is born as his daughter, Savitri. So, without going too much further, then we come to the last, the part 2 actually, then there's part 3, but part 2 is the entire growth of Savitri as an individual, her encounter with Satyavan, the knowledge of his death, and the yoga that opens up in her into the inner countries, whereas Ashwapati's yoga took him into the higher countries, one may say. Savitri's yoga takes her into the inner countries in finding her soul. And in finding her soul, she finds a kind of savior power. See? And then we are shown the transformation that occurs in her. And then, like Ashwapati, she also goes through some dark nights. After the finding of the soul, she goes through a cosmic dark night. There are 3 kinds of dark night talked about. They're talked about in the symbol dawn itself. One is the dark night of the individual. That is, we move around in an ignorance. Our normal ontology is a dark night. Okay. The second is the dark night, which can be called the cosmic dark night, that intervenes between the individual realization and the cosmic realization. You see? That is what Ashwapati feels, and again Savitri feels, between the psychic and the overmental or the supramental. And the third dark night is the supramental dark night, the borders between the overmind and the supermind. And these 3 are all dramatized in this epic. So Savitri goes through them as well. And finally, she encounters death. And we come back full circle to the beginning, which is the night and the dawn of the day that Satyavan will die. And that's where she unleashes the force of her own avatarhood, the Shakti of the supermind that is within her. And in the final dialogue with death, she conquers death, so to say. So this is in a nutshell the story of Savitri as Sri Aurobindo tells it. And at this point, if there are comments, questions, etc., it would be nice to consider. Yes, Matteo.
From the book of the Traveler of the World,
Yeah.
could you comment on the differences between kingdoms and godheads?
Yeah. So why don't we do that in the second session, because I'll go into that more deeply. So at that time we can talk about it a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
So is the story of Savitri just initiated once in Mahabharata, or is there any other illustration of the story
Yeah.
in other texts
Right.
before she opened the king?
Right, right. So the interesting thing is that Sri Aurobindo claims that this is a Vedic story. We don't have it in the Veda at this point. But we do have the fact that the Gayatri mantra is actually an invocation of the goddess Savitri. Though it begins with the term Savitur, right? Tat Savitur Varenyam. So Savitra is the male form of the god to whom Ashwapati prayed. But the Shakti of Savitra is Savitri. And repeatedly, when the Gayatri mantra is invoked and people have written about it, they have talked about it as actually calling on the Shakti of Savitri. Savitri is the goddess to whom the Gayatri mantra is addressed. So, Sri Aurobindo believed that this entire theme of Satyavan and Savitri is a deep, esoteric, symbolic theme that was carried in the Veda and then gets lost and reappears in the Mahabharata in a slightly diluted form. And this is what he has to say about that at the beginning of this book. The tale of Satyavan and Savitri is recited in the Mahabharata as a story of conjugal love conquering death. But this legend is, as shown by many features of the human tale, one of the many symbolic myths of the Vedic cycle. Satyavan is the soul carrying the divine truth of being within itself, but descended into the grip of death and ignorance. Savitri is the divine word, daughter of the sun, goddess of the supreme truth, who comes down and is born to save. Ashwapati, the lord of the horse, her human father, is the lord of tapasya, the concentrated energy of spiritual endeavor that helps us to rise from the mortal to the immortal planes. Dyumatsena, lord of the shining hosts, father of Satyavan, is the divine mind, here fallen blind, losing its celestial kingdom of vision, and through that loss its kingdom of glory. Still, this is not a mere allegory. The characters are not personified qualities, but incarnations or emanations of living and conscious forces with whom we can enter into concrete touch, and they take human bodies in order to help man and show him the way from his mortal state to a divine consciousness and immortal life. See? So that's how he sees it. We may say that, to some extent, we may say that this is his yogic understanding of Satyavan and Savitri, the myth. To some extent, we may say it is poetic license, just as other modern poets, have talked about epics. Like Nikos Kazantzakis has written an epic called Odysseus, a modern sequel. These are all ways by which we take something old and give it a much greater amplification, which is modern because it is subjective. It is taking it into the realm of consciousness. So we could look at it in either terms. In terms of extant literature, no. We just have the story of Mahabharata, and if the story is retold, it could have been retold in vernacular literatures in different ways. We do have other stories. I mentioned some stories from the Western canon. We have the story of Manasa Mangola, in Bengal, which is also a story talking about a wife bringing back a dead husband through the power of a goddess, you see. So these kinds of stories exist, but Satyavan and Savitri story itself, I don't see any other.
But you mentioned Dante's other work
Yeah.
at the beginning, and I was reading Dante's Purgatory.
Yes.
That, like Savitri,
Yeah.
takes you up and down and
Yeah.
up and down.
Yeah. Yeah. True. True.
1 minute you're here, and second minute it brings you down, and
Right.
like it's a sine curve.
Very true. I think also the method of the writing of Savitri is a little like that. He takes you into a world, and then he will describe that world, and then he will either take it down from there or up from there. And again he will start, so there's a kind of a constant going up and down, wavy motion.
Is that like a sine curve?
Is that like a?
Sine curve.
It's almost like a sine curve, yeah. There is that quality to Savitri. Mike.
Devashish, when you were talking about cosmology, Sri Aurobindo's cosmology and the emergent properties, matter, life, and mind, that when Sri Aurobindo describes these, are these necessary, or that it occurred the way it did? Is each latter stage built into the former stage?
Yeah.
Sri Aurobindo?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Mike, and I think the answer is both of them. So in a way, the cosmology is as he experienced it, but the necessity of the cosmology is also shown by him. That's the metaphysical aspect, and the whole first book of the Life Divine actually shows you these various forms of consciousness that constitute these worlds and how these are linked. I mean, one may say that the question of necessity is also related to the question of goal. Worlds are a certain description, a cosmology is necessary to a certain telos, right? If we are to get there, this is the ladder by which we get there, right? So you may say that that's the necessity, because he's trying to give us a metaphysical scheme of what gives meaning to our lives in this cosmos, and it is this metaphysics of these planes that gives that meaning. Yeah.
You mentioned Satyavan, how he was he's an undeveloped character,
Yeah.
apparently, and
Yeah.
you said he was like a cipher.
Yeah.
And I have wrestled with who is Satyavan,
Yeah.
Savitri.
Yeah. Tell
And
me, who is
for me,
Satyavan?
He's such a coming from a Western Christian
Yeah.
tradition. He's such an Adam figure.
Uh-huh.
He's in paradise.
Yes.
But it's interesting, though, he's in paradise because he's in exile with his father.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if this paradisal condition
Yeah.
is now an exiled condition.
Right.
But he is still Adam.
Yes.
And I
nicely
think
put.
this is why, Savitri falls in love with him.
Yeah.
And he's living so close to Earth in kind of her primordial, pristine condition.
Yeah.
So, but this is kind of where I've come.
That's interesting. It is interesting. I see what you're saying, and I'll agree with that. And I'd say that there's another shadow to Satyavan, and that is Christ himself. You see, because unlike Christ, who the internal processes do not show the operation of any Shakti, he is an avatar who undertakes this journey into the darkness of the cosmic condition to experience it and emerge out of it by himself. So in a way, Satyavan is Christ, but Christ with a difference in that it is a female power that will actually pull him out from the darkness. But I think the Christ, the kind of Christ parallel is developed by Sri Aurobindo very strongly in that canto on fate. See, because that entire passage on Christ, and I hope we'll get some time to read some of those passages, I see it as, the importance given to it is partly because that paradigm of the avatar is not dealt with in the Indian pantheon, and partly because we may consider that to be the hidden esoteric life of Satyavan. Yeah, Lopa.
So, Mother talked about three beings, right? The Lord of Nation, which when she was alive, she said that being is still alive. Then I think it was Lord of Falsehood and Lord of Death, and she said these two beings have been conquered. In her lifetime, these were conquered. So can we see a reflection of these beings in Sri Aurobindo's writings? And also when he said that Savitri conquered death, is it a real happening that happened? Because just in 1956 the Supramental came down. So was he doing the work while he was writing about it?
Okay, so this is a very loaded question, and actually it's way too speculative for me to actually be able to say something. No, but let me first say that what you said in the beginning is not exactly true. Okay, so I mean in terms of the facts, I mean the lords. So firstly, there are 4 lords, right, in the mother's saying. So there's the Lord of Light. These are the archangels. They occur in Savitri. They, all of them have their place inside. Sri Aurobindo uses the term the Iron Four for them at a certain place. Iron Four, yeah. So there's the Lord of Light, the Lord of Truth, the Lord of Joy, and the Lord of Life. And these are the arch masons, as he calls them. And they were given the freedom, and that's what I was talking about, the metaphysics of dualities that are given independence must exist in dualities. So if these archangels are thrust into ontology of duality, they have to exhibit their opposite powers. Those are the fallen angels. So the Lord of Light becomes the Lord of Darkness, the Lord of Joy becomes the Lord of Suffering, the Lord of Truth becomes the Lord of Falsehood, and the Lord of Life becomes the Lord of Death. So these are the 4 archetypal lords in esoteric lore, and this esoteric lore is the basic Chaldean lore. You get this in Christianity as well, you see. So essentially the Lord of Falsehood, now to come to what you were asking. So the Lord of Falsehood, according to the mother, was the being behind Hitler. See? And that's the being, she said, has not been converted. It is at large.
Oh, that's the Lord of Nations.
That is also called, she called it the Lord of Nations. It's the Lord of Nations because in a way the entire Second World War was a foregrounding of this idea of racism and nationality, you know, taking on a kind of dark, Sri Aurobindo has a chapter in the human cycle called, it's called True and False Subjective. What is the chapter called, Matthias?
False subjectivism.
No, it's got true also in it. It's got, I think it's called True and False Subjectivism. So it's what it's called. Basically, that's what it's about. It's about the nation that starts seeing itself as separate from others and supreme in its way. You know, a kind of a. Yeah. See. Yeah. It's evoking this laughter because it's kind of like an uneasy contemporary truth. You know, so this is the Lord of Nations that she says is actually the Lord of Falsehood. It's behind every form of centrism, you know, that kind of comes up as ethnocentrism, religious identity, politics, etc., tries to claim its superiority. See? So then you have the Lord of Death. Okay, so the Lord of Death, the mother said, incarnated in her first teacher, Max Theon. And now then we go into real deep kind of speculative zones. Recently there's a book that has come out that if you guys can lay your hands on, I'd really recommend. It is an Aurovillian by the name of Amrit who's written his memoirs. See, it's just come out, and it is not public. He's produced a small number, but it's a very good book. It's very well written, but there's a lot of speculative stuff in it, all of which I take with a pinch of salt. One of them is he claims that Lord of Death later started acting through Satprem. And he feels that Lord is very, very much alive, or very much active. He has not been converted. The Lord of Light that became the Lord of Darkness was transformed, according to the mother. And so, ignorance in the world, what we call, for example, academic ignorance or knowledge of things, is gradually dispersing. That is one zone in which light is increasing. And finally, the Lord of Darkness, which is the Lord of Suffering, Lord of Joy that became the Lord of Suffering, the mother claims he was dissolved. So that all the various taboos of the world that create suffering, are gradually going to disappear. We may say that there are certain ways of thinking which consider suffering to be a necessity. You see, that subject people to the need for suffering. That is no longer going to be seen as something that has a power to hold. Yes.
So, from what you've just spoken about, it seems that, at least in terms of Savitri
Yeah.
and Sri Aurobindo's work, obviously there's such a duality with Faculties and Savitri and aspiration and grace, life and death.
Yeah.
And it sounds like from all of this, the interventional power, the Shakti, is what connects that duality into a unity or an inclusivity.
Yeah.
But what I found more interesting actually, for this
Yeah.
also sounded like the Shakti is that which breaks the bonds of our material ignorance and
Yeah.
that which overcomes this ontological evil.
Yeah.
So I was curious then what you think the ways that the Shakti can break such bonds.
So, in this particular case, we find that it is the story of an avatar, an intervention, and all that. And I think also I'd like to address what Lopa said about time. I see these as symbolic myths. He calls it a symbol. He says over here that these are not just allegories, but that these are actual forces that may take human bodies. But that doesn't mean that he's actually saying that these people took human bodies. They may have taken human bodies, just as we may say that Christ may have existed. Or even if he did exist, he may have had a resurrection. See, we don't know. But what we can say is that these stories really carry yogic truths. And these yogic truths can be mobilized in our lives as powers of transformation. So for him, to some extent, he's also retelling the mother's and his own stories in this, in a kind of a veiled form. There's enormous passages that really are about the mother's biography, and also passages that are about his own. But they don't map one-on-one, So in that sense, I think these, like what your question was about, how does that Shakti work as a transformative power in our lives? I think in his yoga, he is saying that, that, as I've argued elsewhere, that there are many ways to look at the integral yoga. And there is no one way, and there is no single fixed mythology behind it either. Even this idea that, I think the Divine Mother is, this is one of the formulae through which the integral yoga is understood and can be understood, that he himself paid a lot of investment to. And that is that we surrender to the Divine Mother. And the Divine Mother, so the aspiration for integrality grows in us, and as it grows, we invoke the Divine Shakti, who is the Divine Mother, who gradually increases our knowledge and our power and breaks the bonds. See? So one way of looking at it, if one doesn't want to actually personify the Divine Mother, is as a power from above, a Shakti from above. Shakti in the sense that it is not just a presence, not just a witness, but a actual substance of transformation and a force of transformation that is intelligent and that overrides to some extent our ignorance. Yes.
So in this session, what I take is two things which is the most important: the aspiration and grace. From aspiration from within, grace from above. It sounds very simple, but it can take many births to get that level. Right? And in our routine, like being us, what can we do? I know the ignorance part is something that, but if there is no simple answer and no magic, but if you can just tell what do we do as.
So the aspiration, the problem lies in the fact that, we embody the earthly condition. We embody this cosmic condition. So there are many, each of us is a compromise. There are forces of aspiration in us. There are forces of rejection in us, rejection of the divine in us. There are forces that want to go elsewhere. And we are not even conscious of all these things. So the aspiration begins somewhere. And the root of aspiration is always the psychic being. And we may not have access to the psychic being, but it may influence a part of our being. It may influence the mind, influence the emotions, or something. And then you start with that. And the thing is to intensify that and to bring more and more into it, and then to become aware that it's a relationship. This is where the duality also, this answers a little bit Alicia's question, that that this is a relationship, that whatever we want to call this Shakti, that there is an active force that we are entering into relationship with, and that we are doing whatever we are doing for, because we want to be possessed by that, we want to live that, you see. And so as that sense of relationship grows, then we start recognizing the fact that latent faculties in us are also opening to its influence. We become aware of that in us that stands in the way, How can we bring that along with us? We can open that to that particular power. So it's really a progressing relationship between whatever we have, or we can call our aspiration, and whatever access we have to a Shakti, the Shakti of the integral consciousness.
The last part about the three ignorances,
Yeah.
they are the three Ratris, you said, the
Yeah.
darknesses.
Yeah.
So those are the Kala Ratri, Maharatri, Moharatri.
Yeah.
Right? So the
Yeah.
Kala Ratri is the cosmic Ratri, or is this?
No, the Maharatri is the cosmic Ratri. The Kala Ratri is the individual Ratri. The Moharatri is the night of falsehood.
Why is it called Kala Ratri? Because Kala is time.
The Kala is time, because it's interesting that in Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo will talk about the 7 forms of ignorance, and one of them is temporal ignorance. Temporal ignorance is our limited knowledge of time. We know time only in the span of this little life that we lead, which is covered with a darkness. That is the Kala Ratri, the night of darkness, the night of time. If that were not there, we'd see our lives as a continuity There would be no darkness to temporal continuity.
As a follow-up, this particular Kalaratri or Maharatri, they come in a text in the Devi Mahatmya.
It is Devi Mahatmya.
Yeah. So the Devi Purana has the avatars of the Shakti.
Right.
So since you mentioned that we don't have the avatars
Yeah.
of the Shakti,
Yeah,
so maybe it's not as prominent
Yeah.
as the avatars of Vishnu.
Correct.
But it is
the
there.
tantric tradition carries the notion, and yeah, that is there, but it is not developed fully. Deepak.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the Ishvara. Why did Sri Aurobindo use the term Ishvara and not Brahman?
So, Brahman, the term Brahman actually is an Upanishadic term. Before that, in the Veda, they used the term Brahman in terms of Brahmanaspati, as a god who is the lord of the word, who later becomes Brahma. But Brahman is an Upanishadic word that means conscious reality. There is nothing but Brahman. Brahman is the one being there is, or one reality there is. Now, Ishvara literally means the master of will, the Lord. See, Ish, the term Ish, which is behind the term wish, is the power of will. It means will. So, he who has will is Ishvara. In other words, Brahman can be without will. Brahman can just be an existence. Brahman can mobilize its consciousness and become the being of will. So, when it does that, it is Ishvara. Ishvara is always connected with intent, therefore with a cosmos, with the maintenance of a cosmos and its will, its telos. Where is it going? You see. So, that is a, you may say, a subsidiary form of Brahman. Or if you, depending on what school you belong to, you may say that's the original form of Brahman. Brahman comes with will. You see. Yes.
You spoke about, I guess in one of the Vedas, there are three views to see the reality. One is helio cosmic and geocosmic, and the third one I don't recall. One you said is all sun, truth, and which is truth and bright. Other one is duality,
Yeah.
whether it's day and night, or
Yeah.
truth and falsehood going recurring again and again.
Yeah.
The third one,
The third one is the middle view from which you can see the heliocentric and the geocentric at the same time. In other words, the perception is not of being bound by the dualities, but to see the world of dualities as a condition that allows a certain kind of manifestation to take place.
how can we relate it? Duality, we can understand this is where we live in. The third one, third view.
The third one, that's what I was saying, that those are the hymns that talk about the two mothers or the two sisters. So, day and night are seen not as the sun is lost in the night, right, but as necessary to a greater evolution, you see. So, each dawn is bringing a greater evolution. So, for example, if we go back to what we were talking about, the conquest of death, and how Sri Aurobindo takes it, that each of our lives is like a dawn and a day and then a night. We are actually swallowed up by death. But in that, the soul feels its inadequacy in being compelled to die, to the darkness. So, the question that can be asked is, what will it do next? Each life it is trying to evolve to a sufficiency in which it is not compelled by the darkness, you see. So, now this third way of looking actually understands that. So, it sees that darkness and light are both two mothers that are preparing the birth into fullness of the soul. the evolution of the soul to a point where it knows itself to be superior to the two mothers or equal to them. It's not compelled by anything. Yes.
Are you able to map those 7 planes you mentioned to the Kundalini or chakras or anything like that?
Yeah. So
I mean, in detail.
yeah. So in the Kundalini, in our chakras, the Muladhara belongs to the Annam plane, matter plane. Then the 3 that follow, the navel sex center, the navel center, and the heart center belong to the vital realm, the second realm of the life world, what is called pranamaya world. And then the throat center, the Ajna chakra, and the Sahasrara are 3 centers of the mind world. The Sahasrara opens to the worlds beyond, the cosmic worlds of mind. Normally people fall in trance there, but Sri Aurobindo is saying that we have to open up our waking consciousness there so that one can rise further above and build the bridge with what is further centers that have not yet become common to us.
But can you map exactly like Anna, Mana, Chitta and Sat Chitananda, these ones or not yet?
So Satchidananda, there is no center. There is no center for Satchidananda. In Mana has got 3 layers to it. One is the expressive layer, which is the throat center. Then the Ajna chakra, the center between the eyebrows, is the intelligent center. And the Sahasrara is the cosmic center of mind. These are all Mana plane. So you can map 3 of the 7 to the 7 of the chakras. And 4 of the 7 don't have any chakras. You have to develop them. Yeah.
So when you talk about this third world that is a connection between the solar world and the world of duality,
Yeah.
Is that the world that's being expressed in, I think it's Canto 4 when Sri Aurobindo was talking about the 2 in 1?
So that's the greater knowledge canto. Yeah, that's what he's talking about. That's the knowledge that Ashwapati has. And he says this knowledge, he begins the next canto by saying this knowledge he had first he had of time-born men. So this is the secret. This is the secret knowledge. This world that is between the two, and this is what Sri Aurobindo, in a sense, is giving us. That ultimately makes it possible for you not to negate either. This is also the secret of the Isha Upanishad. You don't negate the two.
But this is not the supramental power.
It is the supramental.
It is a
Yeah, it is the supermind. Yeah, it is. He does not use the term here. He doesn't use the term supermind throughout Savitri. And this is one of the reasons that Sri Aurobindo is not interested in creating a system that will be mapping from text to text. If he did that, then we'd be stuck in a religion. So he's giving it in a different way. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, Jeff.
At the end of our class at CIS in the spring, you exhorted us to develop our aspiration.
Yeah.
That if there was one thread we could hang on to, that would be it.
Yeah.
So I found myself all summer looking at that. And my question is, why does it change every day?
Why does it change every day?
But more importantly, what is the nature of it? What does it feel like?
Yeah. So I'd say, it changes every day because there are many aspirations in us. Each individual has got a number of aspirations. But behind all the aspirations is one aspiration. You see, that aspiration formulates itself in a number of ways. So gathering one's aspirations is part of what this is. That it's good if you have many aspirations. It means you're a plural being.
Something I have trouble dividing
Yeah, that's so to be and to have are two different things. That's you know, but when you think your aspiration is to have something, then that becomes in one's ambition. But when you think that it is about becoming something, that's your aspiration. Yes.
I think it's kind of touching and progressing on that question about aspiration and grace. So in most of the aspiration, we just keep on speaking or seeking, right? And the grace, when it falls, you have to go into some mode of silence to either accept it or, I mean, can you kind of explain that, Marge, or what is the required qualification to accept that grace?
So it's what Mother uses the term receptivity, and before that she uses the term opening, right? So aspiration actually ultimately is a very concrete thing. If you're really quiet, then you feel that deep inside you there is something that is going upwards. It's without any content. There's no content to it. It just is there. If you focus on it, then you feel as if everything is going upwards. And as you intensify that, then you can hold a certain kind of quiet. If you're very quiet, then you feel that there's something coming down from above. You can actually experience this in a material way, you know. So that is the grace that comes. And the more it comes, the more it helps the aspiration, it opens up the other layers and all that. It also acts in your environment. It acts in the circumstances of your life. So it's not only inside, it's inside and outside. Yeah, Matil.
I've been wondering this for a while. It might be Indian cultural or something, but author's note, Savitri, daughter of the sun. There's a footnote in the Upanishad that has Yama as a character. Is it the Kata?
Katha,
Yeah, there's a footnote that says Yama is the son of the sun.
yeah.
Are Savitri and Yama brother and sister? I don't mean it to be funny. I've been wondering it for a long time.
Well, these are all multiple relations. They're all the heliocentric realm is intertwined with multiple relations. Yeah, you have to see it. You know, just like sun. The same two are called the two sisters. They're called the two mothers. Sometimes they'll be called the husband and wife. Gender will switch. This is happening all the time over there. Yeah. So depending on how you see it, the relations will change and the qualities will change.